Hello and welcome to another anime lore and theory video. I'm Shergok, your host, and today we are going to take a closer look at how Overlord's most iconic battle makes us question our own morality. And we are also looking at some rather unsettling parallels between Ains and Crown Prince Barbro. But before we're going to take a closer look at any of this, let me quickly thank my Patreons for supporting this channel, as well as say thanks to all users of the YouTube thanks function for making one-time donations. And with that said, let's get to the topic at hand. The question of good or evil could not be clearer. An army of forcibly conscripted peasants, laborers, and other residents of the kingdom of Ains stood on the red, barren soil. The battlefield where countless troops had already been sacrificed in a grueling war of attrition. This Katze plain, saturated by so much suffering and the end of so many souls, had themselves become a horde of the undead, forever shrouded in thick fog. Only one day, the day of the annual war between the Barbro Empire and the Kingdom of Ains, did this mist lived. This yearly conflict, sparked by a declaration of war during the harvest season, and followed by small skirmishes between the kingdom's mass peasant levies and the empire's easily mobilized standing army, the legions of Baharut, was designed to exhaust the kingdom economically. The very plain itself seemed to invite this kind of suffering, this kind of attrition, this kind of human misery, to feed on that negative energy, to grow stronger, to expand, and to spawn more and more powerful undead from that very same energy. To the simple peasant, clutching a wooden spear, with not a hint of metal at its tip, none of that mattered. He only wanted to go home, he wanted to survive, to return to his wife and children, who were starving, because the harvest lay untended in the fields and was rotting. He cared nothing for courtly power politics, nothing for whether emperor or king ruled over him. What he cared about were his own living conditions and how to improve them. If anything, the peasants would have gladly seen the golden princess on the throne, the one who had abolished serfdom and strengthened the right of the common folk. On the other side stood 6 of the 8 imperial legions, professional soldiers, equipped with good armor and sharp swords, flanked by the Empire's overwhelming cavalry, and supported by its aerial troops, the hippogriffs and the many casters trained by Fluda Paradane at his very own academy, giving the Empire an enormous advantage. The sheer number of legions was already alarming. It seemed as if this time the Empire meant business. This time they would push through the ranks of starving peasants and oblivious nobles who saw in this war, in this misery, nothing but a chance to prove themselves on the field of battle, under relatively safe conditions, to get a battle record, or to finally resolve some internal succession conflict and settle scores within the court. But it got far worse. A brilliant but hopelessly outclassed emperor had entered an uneasy pact with an undead king. After being maneuvered himself into this precarious situation, his legions would bleed on the Katze plain, carving a swath of devastation through the kingdom's over 200,000 strong peasant army, and then, with heavy losses of their own, capture the heavily fortified city of Iwantel, guarding the only pass into the western part of the kingdom. All that death would inevitably strengthen the undead overlord and his soon-to-be realm. But Emperor Jerknef had no choice. He needed to show the world just how dangerous this undead overlord was, by making him cast his strongest spell. Only then could he form a grand alliance with the once hostile kingdom of Ains, as well as with the Dragon Kingdom, the Theocracy, and Arkland, against this threat to all living beings. But while the undead overlord was indeed immensely powerful, and made quite an impression when he appeared on the plains, flanked by several hundred Death Knights and Soul Eaters, casting a spell that sent the brightest minds of the kingdom fleeing. In a haste. He was in spirit, not a life-hating undead. He was not a creature from the beyond. He was simply a human. Someone who came from the distant future of the year 2136, but who fundamentally still had a sense of morality. One very similar to that of modern Japan. And his magical power, coupled with his unquestioned rule over a demonic stronghold called the Great Tomb of Nazareth, left him with every option. He could simply order one of his battlemates, Naber al-Gamma, to teleport behind King Ramposa III in order to remove him and end the succession dispute in his favor, showing the demoralized troops the king said, without his body, make it clear that their lives could just end as quickly and that surrender was the only path forward, would have saved 250,000 lives on that very day. The Emperor of Beirut would have been the political loser, and the victor on the battlefield would have been Ains gone alone. And with the peace between the Empire and the kingdom, and his realm blocking the only entrance to the kingdom of Riestais, the annual wars would have ended, and the warring factions separated. Ains could have done that. He could have done so much more to save human lives. Instead, he summoned a Lovecraftian spawn by sacrificing 70,000 of the kingdom's troops, calling forth the monstrous Dark Young to trample the remaining soldiers. It was a bloodbath, a stampede the Katze plane had never seen before. And the man inside that undead body knew what he was doing. He knew that through his skeletal hands, hundreds of thousands would die, and millions more would suffer. Yet he could think of nothing else but the benefit all those human sacrifices would bring to his one and only great tomb of Nazareth. It seems so obvious who was good and who was evil, who was the monster in this war, on which side one should stand morally. Carne village lay not far from the Katze plain, near the fortress city of Irantel, and from this very city, Crown Prince Barbro rode with several thousand men to investigate reports of goblins. King Ramposa did this because he loved his eldest son. The boy was as dumb as half a brick and mentally twice as clumsy, but he still was his own flesh and blood. And Ramposa couldn't bring himself to strip him of his birthright and instead crown his brilliant but unattractive half-brother Zanek, who would have been a much better king. But neither could he make a man with the brain of a compost bin into a king, and neither could he strip this authority from him. And so the succession dispute between Zanek and Barbro began. And in this decisive battle, where the kingdom and the empire moved thousands of troops, and where every single one of them counts, where every single one could mean victory or defeat, the kingdom spared a few thousand men as an escort for this crown prince, because he was sent to deal with some goblins, supposedly around the village of Carne, a village with a few hundred people in it at best. The crown prince, well aware that he had been politically sidelined, locked out of the battle and the glory it promised, wanted to return to the main army as quickly as possible. He planned to quickly scan the village, defeat some goblins, leave a few riders there if necessary, but then return to the battle. And perhaps he would found have glory. Perhaps he could even outflank the empire, who had much less troops, but who were of much better quality. And then he could make up the difference by sheer surprise and positioning, in order to carry the day, so that he would be credited with the victory, and so that he could decide the succession in his favor. But what he found when he arrived at Carne surprised him: high wooden walls and watchtowers, making the village at the forest edge look far more powerful than it should have been. For some reason, the villagers didn't welcome their own crown prince, who at first meant them no harm. He didn't really want anything from them except to ask about goblins and eliminate them quickly, so that he could rejoin the main army. But the villagers of Carne didn't know about that. Just as Barbro didn't know what happened in Carne. At the start of Overlord's story, Ains saved Carne village from an elite unit of fanatical religious zealots. The Sunlight scripture of the theocracy had disguised themselves as imperial knights of Baharut and devastated border villages, hoping to lure out Gazav Stronov, the strongest warrior of the kingdom, and to then eliminate him. And this plan would have worked. Gazav would have perished had Ains not intervened. From then on, Ains had two key people, Enri and Inferior, in this village to protect. To Inferior's potion brewing skills, the village became valuable enough for Nezarec to protect it. In order to protect Inferior and his operations. But of course, the village itself, all of the lives of the villagers, didn't mean anything to Ains. But as a gift to Enri, the young village chief, which Ains rescued, not out of any concern for her or her little sister's well-being, but solely to pay a debt to one of his old friends. This back then young village girl had received 2 horns of the goblin general from Ains, worthless junk as far as the overlord knew about. Because the goblins summoned were weak and unremarkable, but for such a weak and unremarkable village they still were a vital boon. And they helped the villagers immensely. And thus 1 horn was spent to summon them, while the second one was held in reserve. And these goblins were also the ones who made Enri realize that even man-eating ogres could be integrated into the community and their strength could be used to help the village. After all, they didn't eat humans out of malice, but simply out of hunger. And if they could pay for their food with their strength, both sides would benefit. And Prince Zanek might have understood these arguments. He might have recognized the value of demi-human forces and found a diplomatic path towards Enri. But Barbro, out of impatience, out of arrogance and anger, let his impatience take over. He had a watchtower set on fire, and when pitch-covered arrows rained down and the tower burned, the villagers, many of them who had survived, albeit barely, the rampage of the supposed Knights of Baharut, who had now found a second home in Carne, saw nothing but the actions of yet another human monster. Whether theocracy, kingdom or empire, they all seemed to the villagers to be the real threat, the ones who truly endangers their own lives, not the demi-humans, not Ains, not the undead king. And when Barbro gave the order to attack, Enri, Inferior, and the children fled, only to be intercepted by Barbro's cavalry, who was instructed to slaughter the women and children as well. In desperation, Enri blew the second goblin horn, while much of the villagers who could fight were busy with the infantry of Barbro at the other side of Carne village, at the front gates. Out of the 4 ogres, 3 had already perished, and much blood was spilled. But to her astonishment, and that of Inferior, that of the villagers, and of course to Barbro's troops, and to Ains who was watching, an army of goblins appeared, far, far superior to Barbro's troops. And it went on the offensive. Barbro considered fleeing, but even on the battlefield, he couldn't do away with court politics. Even as his troops who were fighting for him were slaughtered, he wanted to debate the order of retreat to preserve at least part of his image. Naturally, another noble should flee first, certainly not him. And not a single thought was spared for the villagers or his own men. He set peasants against peasants, villagers against villagers, for his own political advantage, and never for a moment considered what the people that were fighting for or against him were enduring. He understood what he was doing. The people would lose their lives, but he didn't care. Just like the undead overlord, he thought only of what he would gain from all of this, the glory of defeating some goblins, the heroic return to the main army in the nick of time in order to save his father, and to win glory in battle, and the crown of his entire country. In the end, both Ains, the undead overlord, and Barbro displayed the same morality. Only Henry's villagers, where the elders choose to sacrifice themselves for the young. Take notes, boomers, where people first thought of the community rather than themselves. Where every individual was judged not by blood, not by their tribe, not by their species, but by character. Behaved as you'd expect from a normal anime protagonist or a noble hero, including the rescue by the goblin army at the very end. But neither Henry nor her little goblin army had any realistic chance against Ains. The actions of the Sorcerer King improved Carne on a small scale, and later strengthened his Sorcerer Kingdom at a larger one, which was founded on Retold's territory with parts of its former population. And for them life became safe, the people became wealthy, and the state became powerful. And I think that's the art behind Overlord. It makes you question your own morality. There's no good hero, no morally perfect protagonist this time. Ains is a cold overlord who wants the best for himself and his grey tomb. King Ramposa and his sons, as well as the court, were preoccupied with themselves and their own power struggles. Neither cared truly for the lives of these simple peasants. And so the question arises, what would you do? Whose side would you stand on? Or could you even stand on a moral point? What could you live with it? With whom would you side? Because neither side, neither Ains and his Sorcerer Kingdom, nor the Kingdom of Retold, nor Emperor Jerknef and his Empire of Barut, had the interest of the common people at heart. For Ains, humans were at best zoo animals, whose happy lives, prosperity and comfort would contribute to the prestige of Nazareth, serve his great tomb, because it would be Ains who created this utopia, and his tomb would receive the credit for it. On the other side, the royal court of King Ramposa cared so little about the people's suffering that they didn't even realize the empire was waging an economic war with every single declaration of war against them, until hunger and high prices began to threaten their own power. Only then did they act. Overlord, in my opinion, masterfully portrays an undead overlord acting in his own interest, yet makes him the moral equivalent of a human not bound with this overlord body, who had his humanity and emotions not suppressed, and to every other human character with intact emotions. The attack on Carne, on the other villages, all those cruelty and all those violence was carried out not by the undead, but by humans with intact emotions for their own sake. The difference between Ains and the rest of them was power. And at the end of Overlord's third season, the question lingers, who is the monster here? Is there even a difference between Barbro and Ains? Both were initially indifferent to Carne, both pursued their own interests within the village. And I think that this general conflict fed also directly into volumes 12 and 13, and the ongoing question of what is just and what is justice. It was the fertile soil for Nea and her teachings. But okay, that's it for today's video topic. That's it for the parallels between Ains and Barbro and the greater moral questions that are asked by Overlord. As usual, a quick disclaimer: just because you're writing from a character's perspective doesn't mean you approve of everything that character does. And if that's it, now it's your turn. What's your opinion on this topic and on this video? Let me know it down in the comment section. And while you type, I say thank you very much for watching, thanks to all of my Patreons for supporting this channel, and as usual, I say my special thanks to Other Daddy Other, ASK, Bad Guy Ye, Bad Burrito 316, Beezer, Ben C, Brandon S, Brandon D, Chrissy, Crowley 0221, Sia, Crystal Prime, Dead Slime, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Demon Xenomorph 1987, Devin Downen, Ding Dong, Din Pep, Dragonlord Placido Saxophone, Duckwagon, Dunkler Krieger, Dystopia II, Enigmatic Unicorn, Feral Shivan, Guy with That Head, Hector Marino, Hoss, Huster, Jacob G, Jana B, Jason, J. Morris, Chromius, Kyle R, Lee K. Long, Legendarius, Le Louche Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishikian Rai, Lord Touch Me, Loverazer, Merowek, Mr. Shoes, Mr. Tweaker, Michael R, Michael Y, Nope, Oh Hell No, Normal Toad, O'Kill, Overlord General Gasper, Paddy Pentum, Personage, Ruru, Primus 11, Rhinomere, Q&A Caracos P, Shergox's Daddy, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Sir Axolotl, Super Tier Magic Batista Bomb, Supreme Cheese, Staris, Ted, Texas Deer, The Orc Warboss, Rocket Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vash Hawkeye, Vegito27, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, Xenokai, and Sonegon. Thanks guys. Anyway, have a nice day, and I hope to see you all again soon on my next video.